everyone, welcome back. My name is Sonia Siddiqui, and joining me today again is Stephen Green. So, hi, Stephen.
Hi.
And Stephen's going to be telling you everything you need to know about citizenship, permanent residency in Canada. And you are more than welcome to ask questions. And I'm going to hand it over to Stephen now.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Sonia, and good morning to everyone. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are. Green and Spiegel is the largest immigration firm in Canada. We specialize only in immigration, and I am the managing partner of our firm. I've been involved in immigration for over 30 years, just like ACCES. And I am the past president of the Canadian Bar Association National Section for Immigration and Citizenship. And I guess my last sort of important point is that I was involved in teaching many immigration consultants with respect to passing their exams in order to be a consultant in Canada. So let's talk about our agenda for today. And what we're going to do really is discuss what does it mean to be a permanent resident? How does a permanent resident keep their status? How do you lose your permanent resident status once you obtain it? And can I sponsor my partner, my spouse, my children? What about my parents, my grandparents? And then we'll talk a little bit about the permanent resident card. And once you become a permanent resident, how do you acquire the rights of citizenship once you become a permanent resident? So what is permanent residence? Permanent residence is unlike a temporary document. It means that you are going to be in Canada permanently. So for example, if you're on a work permit, if you are on a visitor record, if you're on a study permit, those are all temporary documents, and that means that after you finish your visit, after you finish your work, or after you finish your studies, then you will leave because it is a temporary document. So permanent residence is just the step before you become a Canadian citizen. And the word immigrant and permanent resident is used interchangeably. So if I say I'm an immigrant, it also means that I am a permanent resident. If you become a permanent resident, there are certain rights that you acquire once you become a permanent resident. For example, if you went to university, you would get special benefits that you are a resident of Canada and that you do not have to pay foreign student fees. If you are a permanent resident in certain circumstances, unlike temporary documents, you would retain or be able to obtain health coverage in the province that you go to. So those are some of the things that permanent residents acquire as benefits once they are able to acquire that status. So we talked last time about getting permanent residence, but now I want to talk about what do you do once you've got your permanent residence and how are you able to keep it? Because the Canadian government has said if you're going to be a permanent resident, meaning you're going to permanently live in Canada, then we want to make sure that you are actually staying here. So what happened was that the Canadian government, when they looked at maintaining permanent resident status, reviewed the law, and they came out with basically 4 criteria to maintain your permanent resident status in Canada. And the first one is that if you are a permanent resident of Canada, the Canadian government can examine your status in Canada going back 5 years. So if I came to Canada in 2000 and it's now 2005, then the Canadian government will look at my residency from 2000 to 2005, or if I came in 2010 and it's now 2015, the Canadian government will look at those past 5 years. And in those 5 years, you have to do certain things for a minimum of 2 years. So 2 out of 5. And what that means is that the government will examine your permanent residency and they'll ask you these 4 questions. The first question is, have you been able to maintain your permanent residence for 2 out of the 5 past years? So, for example, if today is 2019, the government will go back to 2014 and say, in that 5-year period, were you able to accumulate 2 years of physically present in Canada? So, for example, if I happen to be from India or Poland, and during that 5-year period, I went back for holidays, or maybe I went back for a business trip, I'm certainly allowed to do that. But after the 5 years, the government want to see that I was at least physically present in Canada for an accumulation of 2 years. So I can be in Canada for 3 months, I can leave for 3 months, I can come back and stay for a year, I can leave for another 2 months. But at the end of that 5-year period, the government will want to see that I was able to accumulate at least 2 years in the past 5 inside of Canada. And that can be anywhere in Canada. It can be in Quebec, it can be in British Columbia, Newfoundland, anywhere inside of Canada, as long as it adds up to 2 years. And the next question is that if I wasn't able to stay in Canada for 2 out of the 5 years, the government will ask, are you married in a common law relationship or a same-sex relationship with a Canadian citizen that has to be outside of Canada? And if that is correct, then the time you spend outside of Canada as a permanent resident, being with a Canadian citizen, will count towards the 2-year accumulation out of 5. And again, that's showing how Canada respects the family and how family is so important in Canada. So, for example, if I am married to a Canadian citizen, and my Canadian citizen wife has to be in Dubai doing some work for 3 or 4 years, and I accompany my wife to Dubai, that time abroad will count towards my 2 years of residency inside of Canada. And again, that's showing how important family reunification is in our immigration system. So if the answer is no, I have not been able to physically be in Canada for 2 out of 5 years, or no, I'm not married or living with a Canadian citizen abroad, then the next question the government will examine, they say that, Canadian business and the promotion of Canadian business is very important within our country. And if you are traveling abroad on a temporary basis on behalf of a Canadian company, then that time may be able to be counted towards your 2-year residency requirement inside of Canada. So, for example, if you worked for me, Green and Spiegel, and I hired you as an immigration consultant, and I sent you abroad for 2 to 3 months, that time would count because you're away for 2 to 3 months working on behalf of a Canadian company, and it was at a temporary assignment, and you're coming back home to Canada. So again, we're trying to see the connection to Canada, we're trying to see the promotion of Canadian business, and that's why the Immigration Act permits people to go abroad on behalf of a Canadian business. And I guess if you haven't been able to physically be in Canada for 2 out of 5, you haven't fallen in love with a Canadian citizen, you aren't in an employment relationship with a Canadian company and traveling on a temporary basis, then the last question the Canadian government will ask you to see if you've maintained your permanent residence is, are there any sort of special reasons why you haven't been able to remain in Canada physically for 2 out of 5 years? So they look at the humanitarian and compassionate reasons. And again, that could, be so many different things. Maybe you were away on a holiday and you got injured and you broke your hip and you had to be in a hospital for 6 months and you came back. Then you would be able to try to explain to the immigration officer, hey, the 6 months that I was away in that period of time should count towards my residency because it really wasn't my choice. I was hospitalized, there are humanitarian reasons, and I came back to Canada as quickly as possible when my hip was healed and I was able to travel. So those are really the only 4 ways in which one can maintain their permanent resident status. So now that we've talked about maintaining your permanent residence, can I lose it? And the answer is yes, you can. You can lose your permanent residence if you don't meet one of those 4 things that I just discussed, meaning that you weren't in Canada for 2 years, you weren't in love with a Canadian, you weren't working for a Canadian company abroad, or there aren't humanitarian reasons. Then the immigration can take away your permanent residence. But a very important one to be aware of is that if you get convicted of any type of serious crime inside of Canada, then you can lose your permanent resident status. And the current Canadian government has expanded the definition of serious crime, and that can now include driving under the influence. So you have to understand that if you are charged and convicted of driving under the influence, you could lose your immigration. So it's very, very important that if you ever get charged with any type of criminal offense in Canada, you seek advice from an immigration lawyer to understand that if you do get convicted of this offense inside of Canada, will it affect your permanent residence? And it may. And it may also affect your right to appeal the loss of that permanent residence, because in many circumstances, for example, if you haven't lived in Canada for 2 years, you would have a right to go and speak to a judge to explain why you didn't meet the 2 years of being here, or maybe the immigration officer didn't think you were working for a Canadian company, or maybe they didn't believe you were really living with a Canadian abroad. You have the right to appeal that decision. But if you get convicted of certain criminal offenses inside of Canada, you even lose that right to have your case heard by a judge. So it's very, very important that you understand that if you ever get convicted of a criminal offense in Canada, you could lose your immigration. You should absolutely seek advice from a lawyer as to whether or not you pleading guilty. Because sometimes people just say, oh, I pleaded guilty, I paid a fine of $200, it should go away. It doesn't. By paying a fine, that means you are convicted, and that could result in you losing your permanent resident status, which would mean that you would be removed to your country that you originally came from. So just be very careful if you get into that type of situation. So let's now go to the next topic about visitors. A lot of times you're in Canada as a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen, and you would like to invite some family to come visit you to see what life is like in Canada. So you would invite them for a holiday. And many people require something called a visitor visa, and those are from countries that Canada sort of wants to control people a little closer because sometimes people from that part of the world may not want to leave at the end of their stay. So certain countries are required to get visas, just like I'm a Canadian, and if I want to go to Russia, I need a visa to go to Russia. So certain countries like India, if I want to come from India to Canada, I must apply for a visitor visa. If I want to come from Russia, I need a visitor visa. If I want to come from various African countries, I need a visitor visa. But some people don't need a visitor visa. If you're coming, for example, from the United States and you want to visit family, or you're coming from Europe, you would not need a visitor visa. But it's important to explain in your application to the visa office why you want to come, and this person wants to visit. They will look at such things. Have you traveled to other countries? For example, let's say you are an Indian national. They may say, hey, have you ever traveled to the United States? And after your visit, you certainly went back to India. They will look at your travel history. What are your ties back to your home country? What are your ties in Canada? How long do you want to stay? Do you have enough money for your visit to Canada? Does it make sense that you want to come and visit Canada? So you have to really prepare a proper application to show that immigration officer that your stay is really temporary. Because remember that at the beginning we made the distinction between a temporary purpose in coming and a permanent purpose in coming. If the immigration officer thinks you're going to stay here permanently, then they will not issue you a visitor visa because that's a temporary document. And they would say, you know what? We think you really want to stay in Canada permanently, therefore go and apply for a permanent visa, not a visitor visa. So it's important that you prepare your application, and we help many people prepare their visitor applications to Canada. And Canada also introduced a new program. It started to roll out about a year ago, and now every country must do this that does not require a visa to Canada. They must get something called an electronic travel assessment, ETA. And what that is that if you are from a country that doesn't need a visa, like anyone in Europe, you must go on the government's website, pay $7 and answer a few questions. What is you want to come and visit Canada? Why? Do you have any criminal problems? Things like that. It's done, rather quickly. And the government will respond to you extremely quickly that yes, you have an ETA. If you don't get that ETA, and you're coming from Germany, for example, you will not be permitted to board an airplane. And again, be very careful if you are from one of those countries that does not need a visa, but you do require an ETA, to be very truthful. If you were ever refused entry to Canada, you must tell them. If you have a criminal conviction in that country where you're coming from, you must tell them. And again, going back to driving under the influence, in some countries you just get a ticket. It's not a criminal offense. Well, in Canada, it is considered a criminal offense, and you must answer the application when you fill out your ETA, have you ever had a criminal conviction or criminal problems or been charged? And the answer you would have to say is yes. So be very careful in filling out the ETA. Be very careful in filling out a visitor visa application, because if you don't tell the truth or even make a mistake by error, the immigration department could say, hey, you weren't honest with us and you have misrepresented in your application, and you will be barred from entering Canada for a period of 5 years. So you see the ramifications of not being honest or not telling the government that you maybe had some difficulties in your home country. If your application for an ETA is refused, if your application for a visitor application is refused, you have the right to reapply and maybe give more information and try to show the immigration department that they didn't really understand your situation, and you make it clear, because you, as an applicant for a visa, have the responsibility of meeting the requirements to get that visa. You can't assume that the officer knows information about you. You must present everything to them, and it's your obligation to do that. And as I indicated, not everyone needs a visa, and everyone that doesn't need a visa needs to get an ETA. The only nationals that are exempt from the requirement of getting an ETA are American citizens. So if you're an American, you can still come to Canada without doing the ETA. And that's, based on an agreement that we have between the Americans and the Canadians, because the Americans have a system called IST, where if you come from a country that doesn't need a visa to the United States, most European countries, you have to fill out, similar to an ETA, online, something called IST. Well, Canadians don't have to fill it out to go to the United States. So we have an agreement between the two of us, and that's why Americans do not require an ETA to come up to Canada. So that's really my comments with respect to visiting Canada. And the next area that I want to talk about is if I'm a permanent resident in Canada and I get married, I want to bring my wife, I want to, if I have kids overseas, how do I do that? What's involved? So in Canada, a permanent resident, so an immigrant, or a Canadian citizen can sponsor their spouse, common law partner, or same-sex partner, and any children as a result of that union that are under the age of 22. So you don't have to wait to become a Canadian citizen to sponsor your spouse, common law partner, or same-sex partner. There is no advantage to be waiting to become a Canadian citizen. So as soon as you become a permanent resident, you are in that position to do that. A permanent resident that wants to sponsor, or a Canadian that wants to sponsor their family to come to Canada, and again, I'm going to use the word family to include just here your spouse, your common law partner, or your same-sex partner. So to sponsor your family, a permanent resident can do that. The Canadian government will ask the permanent resident to establish that they have income to do the sponsorship, but the purpose of that is not to say, oh, you need to have a certain amount of money to sponsor your family. That's not correct. The government just wants to see that you're residing in Canada. So that's really the purpose of showing your income tax when you apply as a permanent resident or a Canadian to bring your family. And again, when I say family in this discussion right now, I'm talking about spouse, common law partner, and same-sex partner. So your income is irrelevant for you to be eligible to sponsor your family. A permanent resident or Canadian must also not have any type of domestic violence convictions against them. So if you have that against you as a Canadian or permanent resident, it may affect your ability to sponsor your family to Canada. And lastly, the Canadian or permanent resident that's sponsoring must not be bankrupt or on welfare, social assistance, because the government will not permit you to be a sponsor by definition. And if you are found to be eligible to sponsor your family to come to Canada, then if it is your spouse and your common law partner or your same-sex partner, you are legally responsible for a period of 3 years to financially support that family. If the family member goes on welfare, then the authorities will come after you as a sponsor to pay back that money. So it's a very serious undertaking that you're getting involved in, that you will be financially responsible for the family that you are bringing to Canada. Now, if your family happens to be in Canada as a visitor or on a student visa or on a work permit, and you want to sponsor them, you have two options to file that sponsorship. Let's talk about the in-Canada sponsorship. So if I'm a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen and I marry someone that is currently in Canada, or get into a relationship of a common law for 1 year, or I get married in a same-sex relationship, then I can go ahead and sponsor that person inside of Canada if I choose. The advantage of sponsoring inside of Canada is that my family member would be eligible to obtain a work permit and begin working as soon as that work permit arrives. That work permit would be an open work permit, and that person would be entitled to keep working until the immigration office inside of Canada has an opportunity to look at the application to sponsor. Once they've looked at the application to sponsor and they're satisfied that it's a genuine relationship, then they will ask your family to do medicals to make sure they're healthy, and they will ask your family to get police certificates for the countries that they've resided in since their 18th birthday for 6 months or more. So the advantage then of doing it inside of the country is that you're able to spend the time with your family, and they're allowed to remain here during the whole process of this immigration concept of them being able to stay here as a permanent resident. The process takes about a year to 16 months, depending on your nationality, because sometimes we do security checks that may take longer, but the average time is about a year. And it's a very good option. The disadvantage, however, of doing it inside of the country is that if the immigration officer believes that the relationship isn't genuine, meaning that they think that you're sponsoring this person and this person really doesn't want to live with you for the rest of your life, or really only married you or been living with you just to get immigration, then that application will be refused. And there is no right of appeal to the immigration board, who normally looks at those types of refusals. So that's the disadvantage of doing it inside of Canada. If you decide that you want to do a sponsorship outside of Canada, then, and if your family happens just to be in Canada, then they can go ahead and stay in Canada while this process is going on outside of Canada. They must make sure that they maintain their temporary status. So if they're here as visitors, they must extend their visas. If they're here on work permits, they must do that. Or study permits, they must keep on extending. And you file the paperwork as if they are living outside of Canada. And the application again takes between 12 to 16 months. And the advantage of doing it outside of Canada, and remember, your family can still be in Canada provided they keep from extending their temporary document. The advantage is that if the immigration officer feels that this is not a genuine relationship, then you have a right of appeal to the immigration board. So you have to decide yourself, do you think you've got a great case? Then I would say you might as well do it inside of Canada. Do you say, well, my case is kind of unique, I'm a little concerned, maybe it could be refused? Then you may want to do the application as if it's being done outside of Canada, which would give you the right of appeal if the application is not accepted. And again, the processing time is about the same inside or outside of Canada. So that is dealing with sponsoring my spouse, my common law partner, or my same-sex partner. But we also have the ability to sponsor our parents and grandparents if we are a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. And each year, the government of Canada has decided how many applications like this they will accept. And this year, they said that they were going to accept about 20,000 parents and grandparents. And what they did was they said, okay, on January of a certain day, we're going to open up our computer system and we're going to let you log in and say that you have an interest in sponsoring your parents or grandparents. And that's what they did. And that program or that opening only existed for about 8 minutes, and it filled up that quickly. And there was a lot of discussion with, people saying that really wasn't fair. If you had a longer name, it may take you more time to type up your parent's name. If you were dealing with a widow, it was faster, so you would get in the system faster. If there were, perhaps you had brothers and sisters that were under the age of 22 and you were going to sponsor them included with your parents, it took you longer. So it really, was, in my opinion, a little bit of an unfair system. And I think the government's going to look at it again, and we'll see what happens next January. But the difference between sponsoring parents and grandparents is that there are financial requirements for you to do that. And on the next slide, you'll see how much money that you must be able to demonstrate. So if I were sponsoring my parents this January, and I was lucky enough to get in that 8-minute window, and if it was myself, my wife, and I'm sponsoring my mom and dad, I would include in my family size 4 people, because that's myself, my wife, and my mom and dad, and I would have to show the government that for the past 3 years, I earned approximately, $60,000 each year. It's a lot more money that you have to show when you're sponsoring parents, because, they say there's more of an obligation because perhaps maybe your parents won't be able to work and stuff like that. And that is a strict requirement. You are also subject to a much longer responsibility when you are sponsoring parents and grandparents, unlike 3 years with your spouse, common law partner, or same-sex partner. Parents and grandparents can go up to 10 years. And what that means is that if your parent decides to go on welfare after 4 years or 5 years, then the government will come after you to pay back the welfare. So you see that, again, it's a big responsibility. Your parents, again, to meet the criteria to come, must be healthy. So if mom or dad aren't well and they may be hospitalized, or mom or dad, maybe had cancer a year ago, most likely they will not pass the medicals and their application could be refused, and then you would have to go and speak to a judge to show there are humanitarian reasons why your parents should be allowed to come to Canada, despite the fact that, mom or dad had cancer 2 years ago. So everybody has to be healthy when you get involved in this sponsorship. If I am married and I'm sponsoring my parents or grandparents, I can use my partner's income, my spouse's income, my common law partner's income, my same-sex partner's income to make up that $60,000. So even though it's just my parents, I'm allowed to use the income of my partner to meet that $60,000. But it must be Canadian source income. So it's important to understand that you could combine income, but you can't use, for example, if I had a brother living here and he made money, it couldn't be my brother and I that are sponsoring our parents. I can only use my immediate family, that being my wife, my same-sex partner, or my common law partner, to make up the financial requirements to sponsor my parents. So that's really it as far as parents go. And then the next slide, I'm just talking about tips to renewing that permanent resident. We pretty much covered all this. You should, renew your permanent resident card well in advance. When we had prepared these slides, about 4 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago, it was taking about 3 months to get a permanent resident card. The government has done a great job, and now they're down to about 3 weeks. So it's quite, more efficient now. But again, I would, give yourself always 3 months or so, because that process sometimes gets faster, sometimes gets slower, and you don't want to be in a position that you don't have a card and you have to travel by airplane because the airplane will not let you fly back into Canada if you do not have a valid permanent resident card. So that's just something to be aware of with respect to renewing your permanent resident card. So now let's talk about citizenship. Who can apply for Canadian citizenship? Under the current law today, anybody that is a permanent resident and has been physically present inside of Canada for 3 out of the past 5 years is eligible to apply for Canadian citizenship. So what that means is, again, just like you had to show that you had 2 years and 5 to renew your permanent resident card, and that could be 3 months here, 4 months there, the same thing applies for citizenship, but now it's 3 years. So it's saying that I can travel up to 2 years in 5, but I must be able to accumulate 3 years of physical presence inside of Canada to meet the physical residence case. So it can be, hi, I'm in Canada for 1 year, then I left for 4 months, then I came back for a year, then I maybe left for another 8 months, and then I came back for another year. Then I would be okay because I didn't go outside of Canada for more than 2 years in the past 5. So you must meet the physical residence test. And the concept of why the government wants you to be physically resident in Canada is because we want you to become Canadianized. We want you to, rub shoulders with other Canadians. We want you to understand Canada. And therefore, we will also give people a bit of a bonus if they were here before they became permanent residents on a temporary document. So, for example, if I went to university in Canada, and I was in Canada for 4 years going to university, and then I got a work permit and I worked for 2 years, and then I applied for permanent resident status and I got my permanent resident status. In the example that I just said, you would only have to wait 2 years after becoming a permanent resident to apply for your citizenship because you get a bonus for the time that you spent in Canada on that work permit. So if I was in Canada on a work permit for 2 years, I get to count a half a day for each day I was physically present on that work permit to a maximum of 1 year, and I get that bonus towards my citizenship time. So my example would be, let's say I was in Canada on a work permit from 2017 to 2019. Then in 2019, I became a permanent resident. I could apply for my Canadian citizenship in 2021 because I only have to wait 2 years as an immigrant and I get a bonus for the time that I was on my work permit. So, I think it's pretty lenient, the requirements of citizenship. But not only do you have to meet the physical requirements, there are other requirements. You must be able to understand Canadian history, knowledge of Canada, the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. So you have a test. It's a multiple choice test where you will go and see a citizenship officer and you will answer questions about who can vote, who's the Prime Minister of Canada, and if you pass the test, then you've met the second requirement. And then the last requirement is that in order to be eligible for citizenship, you must demonstrate that you can speak English or French at a certain level. So if you went to school in Canada, they'll want to see your transcripts. If you really didn't have any connection to Canada before you came, then you may have to take an English language test to show the government that you can speak English. And then you would be eligible to acquire your Canadian citizenship. Canadian citizenship does not require you to relinquish any prior citizenships that you have. So for example, if you are an American citizen and you acquire Canadian citizenship, we will permit you to have both. So we allow that. And once you become a Canadian citizen, then you would be eligible for a Canadian passport, and shouldn't be really any issues after that. But it's very important that you understand you really have two obligations here. Citizenship is taking approximately 1 year to get. However, you know, as they do examine your physical presences in Canada, sometimes people make mistakes and they maybe forgot a day or two. If citizenship becomes aware of that mistake, they will contact you and say, hey, we have a little discrepancy here. Can you please explain what was going on? And then you will write back to them and explain the situation. But those cases can take between 2 to 3 years. And if that happens to you, it's very important that you still maintain your permanent residence in Canada, because citizenship tests and permanent resident tests are totally separate. So it's important that you understand that and keep your permanent residence while you are waiting for your citizenship. So I think that's really all that I have to discuss today on our topics. I'm certainly happy to take a few questions to answer that you may have. So Sonia, I'll leave it to you to decide if we have any questions or not.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. We've got tons of questions here. So a lot of them you have answered throughout the presentation. So everyone, if your question has already been answered, good. But if not, if you still have some questions, go ahead and type them in. Okay, just a lot of repeated questions here. So Alexander says he wants to pursue an MBA outside of Canada. It's in US and it will be 2 years. So it will be 2 years within the 5 years period. Can he be able to maintain his PR status?
Okay, so that's a really good question. When the government was developing the law, I had made representations to them that there should be an exemption. If you are a full-time student abroad studying, you shouldn't have to meet the 2 out of 5 years. The government maybe heard my suggestion but didn't listen to my suggestion. So you are subject to the same requirements of you must be in Canada 2 out of 5. If you cannot be because you're studying your MBA, then the only alternative you have is to explain to the border officer when you come back saying, hey, you know what? I was outside of Canada for, let's say, 2.5 years, so I, overextended by 6 months. I was out for 3.5 years. I overextended for 6 months, and the officer will have to decide if there's humanitarian reasons to overcome that 2-year physical requirement inside of Canada while you are studying. And again, it depends on the officer. But I mean, in that situation, I would want to show the officer, hey, I tried to apply for an MBA in Canada, I didn't get in, or maybe this MBA is very special in the United States, it's not available in Canada, the area that you wanted to study. And generally, they're understanding, but again, there's no guarantee, and it's up to the officer if you don't meet the residency requirements for your PR, and it's up to them if you meet the humanitarian criteria, and that could be one.
Thank you. So let's say if this family has your PRs and they're having a baby soon and they need some help, can they sponsor an aunt to come and visit and kind of take care for the baby for 6 months or more?
Okay, so if you want to invite a family member to be involved in, helping you a little bit here and there, that should be okay, but you have to be careful that the family member is not entering into the area of affecting, the job market where you could have hired a nanny in Canada to help you. So you have to just be very careful with that visitor application and understand, sure, your family member can come and help you a little bit, but you can't go to the extent of, hi, this is my full-time nanny, because you can find nannies in Canada and there's another process for nannies to come to Canada. So they can certainly come and be involved in the celebration and help you with certain things. But if it goes beyond sort of helping and just being a family member, then you may want to look at getting that aunt a work permit under our nanny program.
I see. Thank you. And if you're on, hold on. Okay, so you have PR. Are you able to apply for EI, Second Career Grant, or OSAP before becoming a citizen?
You'd have to, I don't believe there's any issue. You'd have to look at the criteria of the grants that are given, but I don't believe there's any issue.
Thank you. And you mentioned the income that was required to sponsor family members. Is this income before tax?
So the income that you must demonstrate is if you are self-employed, for example, if you're a taxi driver and you deduct your gas and insurance, that is net income. If you are an employee, it's gross income. So for example, if you worked for me and you earn $40,000 a year, that's your gross income, and that's what the government looks at. If you worked as a self-employed Uber driver, then the government looks at net income.
I see. So we have another question here from Chinweke, wants to know, so in order to sponsor my family, I have to be a PR for at least 3 years because they're looking at the past 3 years' income, correct?
That's dealing with parents and grandparents. You must demonstrate that you have 3 years of taxes. However, if you were here before on a work permit, then you can include that income too. So for example, let's say I was on a 2-year work permit and then I got my immigration. I've only had my immigration for 1 year. If I have tax returns for 3 years, I can sponsor my parents and grandparents just after 1 year. They're looking at the tax situation of 3 years, not the immigration for 3 years.
All right, thank you. And is there a process to sponsor siblings that are over the age of 22, or they have to go through the whole PR process themselves?
Anyone that's over the age of 22 or is 22 is on their own, and there is no sponsorship for siblings.
Okay.
22 and over.
All right. And do parents get any sort of health coverage while they're being sponsored?
Parents are not entitled to health coverage until they become a permanent resident of Canada. Once they become a permanent resident of Canada, then they must wait, depending on the province, but most provinces, it's a 90-day wait period. After arriving as a permanent resident, they will get health coverage.
All right. And when does that 3-year period start? Is it when they get their PR card, or when their PR application was approved, or since they set foot in Canada?
So the 3-year period for citizenship starts the moment the immigration officer signs your confirmation of permanent residence. Because the PR card a while ago was taking 2 to 3 months, now it's much faster, but it's the moment the immigration officer signs the confirmation of permanent residence that the department gave you when you asked to become a permanent resident.
I see. Another question here is, Ala is a Canadian citizen and he's currently working in the US and wants to know, and he's there for 2 years, and wants to know if he'll be able to sponsor his spouse in the US while working there.
Okay, so really interesting question. There's a special exemption for Canadian citizens living abroad that wish to sponsor their wife that they married while they were abroad. If you are a Canadian citizen and you are planning to come home, let's say in a year, you can sponsor your wife now from the US. You indicate to the immigration authorities, hi, I'm living in the US, I'm a Canadian citizen, I got married, I would like my wife to obtain her permanent resident status and I'm going to sponsor her. I must prove, however, as a Canadian, that I intend to return. So included in that application should be documentation to show that I maybe have a job waiting for me, maybe I've bought a house and it's closing soon, or I've signed a rental agreement. So just proof that I intend to return. And if immigration is satisfied that I intend to return, then I can sponsor my spouse, wife immediately. That special exemption does not apply to permanent residents. A permanent resident must be residing inside of Canada to sponsor a wife from abroad.
All right, thank you. So we're gonna start wrapping it up here because we've a lot of the questions that are here have already been answered in the webinar. And Stephen, thank you again for giving such informative advice to everyone. Do you have anything else you want to say before we move on?
No, I think we've explained anything. If anyone wants to meet with us, please contact us, and we're happy to have a private consultation with you. As I indicated, we are the largest Canadian, immigration firm in the country. We've been doing this for well over 30 years, and we would be happy to meet with you and help you with any types of immigration issues.
Thank you. So everyone, you will get an email about 2 hours from now, and we'll have all the contact information and everything that you need to know in regards to contacting Green and Spiegel, or you can check out their website and contact them as well. And before we move on, just want everybody to know if there were a lot of job search questions in there as well. If you are, if you have any questions about, job search, resume building, interviews, check out our website and click on ACCES, and you can see some of our past webinars. There's lots of resources, guides, and blogs that you can check out as well. And for people who are on their way to Canada, you are probably eligible to take the Canadian Employment Connections pre-arrival program, where we assist you with your job search before you even land in Canada. And for that, you can email cec@accessemployment.ca for more information. Again, thank you all for participating. Follow us on our social media, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So if you want to know what's going on at ACCES, whether it's online or in-house, it's always promoted on our social media. And again, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. And if anybody has any questions for Stephen, you will be getting some contact information, and you can reach out to them afterwards as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day or evening ahead. And thanks, Stephen, again.
Our pleasure. Have a great afternoon, everyone.